right, this is the Dane Moore NBA podcast brought to you by Prize Picks, coming at you live here at Falling Knife Brewing Company. Yes, make some noise so people listening at home feel bad. Yeah. I got Britt Robson here with me. How we doing, Britt?
I'm well.
You're well. So I got a handful of different things we'll talk about tonight. We have a third mic right here that we'll take questions, probably do like half the time doing that. So you guys can choose what it is that we talk about tonight. But Britt, I think I want to just start by sort of recognizing where we're at the All-Star break. And I thought you did a good job of hitting on that in your column last week, just sort of about enjoying the ride and enjoying where this team is compared to other seasons. I think I do a bad job of that sometimes, and you've been here for all 35 of them. And I thought it was interesting in your piece kind of referencing the Christian Laettner teams of the 90s or like the Mike Miller and Randy Foye teams of the early 2010s.
Every name brings a dysfunction to
Yes, I was going to get to the good ones. Kevin Garnett won the MVP. I don't know if you know that. 2003, 2004. But what you said in that piece was, this is as good as that. And, I mean, the record kind of reflects that, but I think it feels as good as that. And that's not just in the fan base or from where we sit, but kind of from what you are feeling and seeing in the vibe of the team. How would you just compare this season, 2023-24, to 2003-2004, the only other time this team was actually good?
Well, there's, the most obvious similarity is that you figured that the Wolves would be good, but you had no idea they would be this good. In 03-04, they hadn't gotten out of the first round in 6 straight playoffs. And there was actually, back then, disgruntlement among the fan base that this team only made it to the playoffs and never went further. Those were the days. But I think that, you had KG, you had Spree and Sammy, their first seasons on the team, and you had this kind of like joint recognition that, hey, everybody here is really good. We click well together. All the things of a really good winning team. You had Fred Hoiberg, just fantastic off the bench. Wally Zerback was hurt, which, gave Hoiberg a little more room to be like the designated sixth scorer. Irvin Johnson and Michael Olowokandi. They started with Olowokandi, who was, speaking of dysfunction, kind of never a guy who really cared that much about basketball. I did enjoy his Che Guevara T-shirt, but he wasn't nearly as good a player as that T-shirt might think he might be. So, but I Irvin Johnson was like the consummate pro and a guy who held the team together really well. Trenton Hassel was a revelation, a lot like Na is this year, only with more minutes. A defensive guy, a guy who would kind of unheralded, who was playing really well. But I think one of the reasons I wrote what I wrote last week is that I have seen all the teams that they've had, and there have been 2 like tsunamis of hope, and one was the KG Spree. I mean, if you don't count the Gugliotta KG Marbury, which was kind of stillborn, but if you think about what happened in 03, 04,
good joke.
That was there. And then the next one was Jimmy, and Jimmy with Tibbs and Cat and Wiggins, and whatever you think of Jimmy Butler, he was a fantastic player who really elevated this team in many, many ways. But dysfunction,
kind of like Rudy, right?
Huh?
Like kind of like Rudy.
Yeah.
I don't think we ever really make that comparison.
I mean, he had the ability to get to the line like better than anybody I've seen that was kind of doing it semi-honestly, unlike Embiid or somebody. But essentially, my point is, to get around to it finally, is that the 03-04 team and the Tibbs Jimmy team both exploded in a firebomb of dysfunction. Spree wanted more money in his contract. Sammy, as usual, had signed a contract that was lowballed, and he just never could resist getting the instant money and then regretted it. It was not the first time that happened to him in his career. And so there was this dysfunction happening, and then everybody knows kind of about what happened with Jimmy. You have a Timberwolves team now, and they could flame out in the first round, and all the equation could change. But we don't know that right now. What we do know, and this is subsequent to my writing the column, Mike Conley signed an incredible hometown discount to stay here for 2 more years. Rudy Gobert is locked up for another 2 years, had a year where he was not himself at all, and then a year he was much better than himself. You have the components. You have 3 guys, Nas, Jade McDaniels, and Ant, who are all getting their first fat contracts and are all blooming before our eyes. And so you have, I think for the first time in Timberwolves history, the idea of a sustained winner. The Wolves did not make the playoffs the year after 03-04. Flip Saunders resigned. The year after Jimmy Butler and Tibbs made the playoffs, Jimmy Butler wanted to be traded in September of that year, and Tibbs was gone before the end of that next year. I am very confident that Chris Finch will be here a year from now, and I'm very confident that this team will not fail to make the playoffs in 24-25. The point being is that this is the most firmly built, reliable group of players, in my opinion, that the Timberwolves have ever had. And when that thought occurred to me, I thought, why haven't I been writing about this? Well, the answer was because they gave us all kinds of reasons to doubt them. You know, the Charlotte game was like this incredible kindergarten fest, and there were a lot of fourth quarter collapses, and, you know, you get into like this Stockholm Syndrome idea that, you know, they're going to screw up again. But they've had 55 games. They have not lost more than 2 games in a row thus far. There's only one other Timberwolves team that's done that. That was 03-04. So, long-winded answer. The point being that if you're not optimistic about the Minnesota Timberwolves now, you are missing a fantastic window to be happy. I would take it.
The people's champ, Britt Robson. There you go. I think what's turned for me a lot in the last 3 weeks, month, or up to the All-Star break is the one nagging thing that led you to believe a game could have a fourth quarter, you know, fallout, or, you know, just kind of let this team crumble a little bit, is the offense. It has consistently not been the offense of a number 1 seed or a top team in the league. And what we have happening over these last 2-3 weeks, I mean, they're 9-3 since the kindergarten Charlotte game.
Right.
And I think they're 11th in offense since then. And if you just break it down to the last 2-3 weeks, it's like 4th. And that, I struggled with that a lot at the beginning of the season. Am I like, okay, have I only covered bad teams? Do I only know how to talk about what isn't working? And I had to like check myself on that some, but something actually wasn't working for even when they were winning a lot, was they did not have a strong and effective offensive team. So much of that has to do with the way in which they were playing offense and what they weren't doing. And you said it's, you know, what happened and is this sustainable? Right. And what about these last 3 weeks, which I'm getting close to, makes you believe that the offense can be sustainable for the rest of the season at this level?
2 things. I mean, we've all seen enough bad offense, and we know, I mean, if Ryan Gomes is the best guy in your team, you probably don't have a good offense.
True.
They sent 2 guys to the All-Star game this year who are known for their offense much more than they're known for their defense. Anthony Edwards can play excellent defense when he feels like it, and he feels like it a lot more nowadays, but he is still not known for his defense. He's known for his offense. Karl Anthony Towns obviously is known for his offense. So you have two guys among the 12 to 15 or whatever that get picked in the entire league that are offensive players. So you're going to have, you also have a pick and roll team that each one of them at various points in the season, Conley and Gobert, have had true shooting percentages over 60%. I think they may still. I know Gobert's is. I don't know about Conley. I think and I imagine it is. But the bottom line is you have Ant, Cat, two offensive guys who are in the Hall of Fame, in the All-Star game for their offense, and then you have a pick and roll team that is elite at what they do. So then you say, well, why aren't they executing or playing well? And anybody who watches even rudimentary basketball knows why, because they were playing incredibly stupidly. Their two biggest scorers would drive into triple teams and turn the ball over and play really, really selfish iso ball and turn the ball over a lot. And then this young team would begin to press on itself and get into a lot of old bad habits. And the fact, again, that they've only lost 2 games in a row this year shows you what a phenomenal defense they have. It's a make-or-miss league, and I will tell you, if you can make people miss in the NBA in 23-24, you will have a huge ace in the hole. So they had that. Now, finally, I mean, Chris Finch, his self-control on this, I've always liked the guy. I really think that his ability to just soldier through all these collapses when everybody was ripping him and you knew what he wanted from these people, and he said it over and over again, and Ant in particular wasn't giving it to him, and Cat wasn't giving it to him, and Slow-Mo was in the weeds with his various offensive problems. Now, for the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you have what the roster would indicate you should have. You have a great finisher at the rim and a great guy who can get putbacks. You have a 45% three-point shooter who's great on the pick and roll and can step back on that high pick and roll and hit the three. And you have two players, Cat's a matchup nightmare all over the court, and Ant can score over triple teams when he needs to, but is even more effective getting off the ball with quick decisions and then getting back on the ball if it comes back to him. But you have the ingredients here. If not an elite offense, you have the ingredients of a top 10 to top 12 offense. And you have, obviously, the ingredients of a number 1 defense, because that's what they've been for this entire season. So, I agree that was the slipping point was, why are they continuing to play so stupidly, and why can't Finch get through to them? And suddenly, he's gotten through to them. They're playing better. I asked Finch at practice just like 3 hours ago, what's the most sustainable part of this offense moving forward? And he said, well, hopefully it is that we won't turn the ball over as much. They've got Monte Morris now, who is, like Mike Conley, very good at not turning the ball over. And I hope that Ant and Cat have realized that baiting refs and driving into triple teams and being much more concerned about if they hear a whistle rather than where the ball is as it leaves his hand, those are the things that will make this team become better than solid. They're always going to be solid this season because of their defense, but they can be something somewhat special if they have an offense that lives up to the talent base that they have.
I think and I don't even know if there's a way to answer this, but the cynical view, right, is that the playoffs will feel a lot like fourth quarters offensively for this team, where they have broadly not been good these last few weeks. withstanding, and then you go to the defensive side of the ball, and you go, okay, well, everyone plays better defense in the playoffs. So how much of a, even if you are the best defensive team in the playoffs, how much like buoyancy does that defense give you? And I still think they'll be a great defensive team. I don't have the Rudy in space concerns or whatever, but what do you think about that from the standpoint of how much quote unquote worse or depressed will the defense be, and how much more will the offense have to sort of, navigate situations and like they are going to, teams in the playoffs are going to intentionally try to put Ant and Cat in those situations where they're more likely to make those, quote unquote bad, not quote unquote real bad decisions that lead to more turnovers. I don't have an answer for that. And maybe the answer just is we have to see what it looks like in the playoffs.
That's the obvious answer. I mean, it is guesswork. What evidence do we have one way or the other? The playoffs are a different beast. And Gobert has been embarrassed in the playoffs with inferior personnel that didn't complement him on defense as well as this team does. But we also know we've seen Gobert. If there is any weakness in Gobert's game at all this year, is that he begins to get a little frustrated when it begins to slip away from him in the fourth quarter, gets a little more foul prone, gets a little more agitated, gets outside himself a little bit too much. Cat's renowned for having playoff seesaw, up, down, up, down. We don't know. And what we have seen from Ant in the playoffs has been nothing but golden, pretty much. But to your point, is having the first seed or the third seed or whatever it is, and people around the league thinking they're pretenders, is that something that gets in their heads because of their past experience? We don't know. What I can tell you is that I don't think Kyle Anderson and Mike Conley will be upset about it, and I think Ant will get better. That's his history. I think that they have 4 months of pretty solid success behind them, and the range of teams that they're going to play, or possibly going to play, the Warriors, the Lakers, the Pelicans, the Kings, those 4 teams all have just phenomenally different scenarios. Steph Curry coming back to try to do it one more time. Draymond Green proving his doubters wrong or whatever. LeBron and AD proving that regular season doesn't matter. Zion, who the Wolves haven't had a matchup for. The Kings, who have a system that really works against what the Wolves do best. But the Wolves they have the best record in the Western Conference for a reason. And you could say, and I had just got through saying the playoffs are a different beast. It is a repeatable thing. You do look at matchups and how to do things. I think I would be shocked if this team won the NBA championship. I would be very pleasantly surprised if they were in the NBA finals. I think they'll win a first-round series, and I want to see who the matchup is in the second round. But that should not detract from what we've seen. We started this ride at the end of October. Right now, it is nearing the end of February. And the Wolves have been almost consistently an enjoyable experience. If you're at all familiar with the Minnesota Timberwolves and you're looking for the lead linings as opposed to the silver linings on this season, I don't know what to tell you. It remains to be seen. Playoffs are guesswork. They haven't been there to this extent. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know they have some really intriguing pieces, and I know that playoff experience for Ant, Jaden, and Nas is nothing but good for this team moving forward, and that if Gobert gets the kind of support he never had in the other playoff series, he's playing in a zone right now in terms of his defense that he's going to be a force that other teams are not going to recognize in the playoffs because he's out for vengeance himself. So I like their chances, if only because they have chances, and that's a new thing.
Right. It's interesting with I've done a lot what team is a good matchup or a bad matchup for a playoff series, and I think what I've just got to is it's probably just going to be an awesome first round series no matter what, and that same is true for whoever the Thunder play and the Clippers play. I mean, it is one of those seasons where I think even the 1 seed and probably whoever winds up being the 8 isn't going to be easy for that team, or they will at least present, challenges. Again, not just to the Wolves, but to the Thunder or to the Clippers or Nuggets as well. So I've kind of shifted away from a little bit more of how do they guard Zion, or what's the, if they're going to spread them out, if it's the Warriors or the Kings, into just, I think it's important to keep a confidence in the idea that you are the best regular season team in the Western Conference. And to me, that might carry as much weight, belief might carry as much weight as the way in which you do or don't match up with a different opponent. And I think to really cement that belief, it is kind of about these final 27 games, because there's a world where if they are closer to 500 for some reason,
right,
injury or otherwise, where you do not have that cemented belief and you get to that 1-8 or 2-7 or 3-6 game or matchup, and I feel like that could hold them back. I do put a lot of importance in these final 27 games of the regular season. What are you looking for to sustain or grow towards the final quarter, third, or whatever of the season?
Well, I want to see consistency in the offense. They've been between 15th and 20th almost this entire season until the last couple of weeks. They're young, so their attention spans are not indefinite. And so I think that 2 or 3 good games, can they do a third and fourth and fifth good game? Their defense is led by a very mature individual who is extremely good at what he does in Gobert. And then there are a lot of perimeter guys who can suffocate you. So I don't worry about the defense. I think that what you're talking about, if you do have to cement confidence in the team, it will come from Ant trusts his teammates, and it works.
Right. That's the thing, is if they, in these final 27 games, we look back at the post All-Star split, and I see the Wolves are 5th in offense in that time. Even
I'll take 12th.
I'm just, or whatever, 7th.
Yeah.
Me personally, I am going to have a lot more confidence in not only just winning a first-round series, but playing the bracket out a little bit more and believing or picking, if I had to, the Wolves over another team. I guess this is just another way of saying if the offense is good, I'm going to like them more. But I do kind of think that this is where they're at. Now, they can still, if they are a mediocre offense, I still do. It's not like they can't win the first-round series. It's not like they can't win a second-round series.
Right.
But we have seen Chris Finch-led teams really turn a corner offensively into being something substantially better than they are in the second half of the season. And if that happens right now, then if I have that in my pocket going into looking at a playoff series, I'm going to do a lot less of the Kings are going to make Karl run around, or who's going to guard Zion, or that sort of stuff. Like that, it's kind of that simple to me. Is it doesn't need to be exactly what it was these last 2 or 3 weeks before the break, but if it feels closer to that than it does feel closer to the first 4 months of the season, then that to me really opens up a realistic and logical belief that this team has a run in them. We do have a third microphone here. We'll take questions here. Britt, I'll just kind of to buy time. I'll just.
Yep.
You mentioned the Mike Conley deal. Just you and I haven't.
But
talked
I
since
do
then.
want to
Okay,
get
go
into
ahead,
this
go ahead.
other thing in response to that, which is there are some things that are beyond the Timberwolves' control here.
Sure.
In particular, there's the whole pedigree argument. There's the argument that when the playoffs hit, LeBron, AD on one side, Steph, Draymond on the other side, or whatever, choose your, ring-bearing guy.
Which is what
fading
every
into the
ESPN
sunset.
person will be talking about when the time comes, and
Because
it's why
it's
they
the
will.
easy narrative, right? But it also
How
is
true is it?
Well, that's the question. The cool thing about legacy people, I mean, Bill Belichick's legacy was pretty fucking solid until about 2 years ago. I mean, the thing about legacies is when they go, they're gone, And LeBron, if you look at, they made the NBA Finals last year, or conference finals. It still felt hollow to me. I don't respect the Lakers. I think that pedigree is, not. I mean, I think that Steph Curry has this type of confidence. Steph Curry can get you 56 points in a night because he's feeling it, and you're playing extremely well, and you lose. LeBron can be playing incredibly well, but doesn't have that kind of bomb you into submission capability. So, which is all to say, back to my original point, the Timberwolves could have a really good postseason in terms of the fact that they are playing extremely well and run into exactly that kind of narrative where the people who are saying, don't sleep on the Warriors, don't sleep on the Lakers, or I would say don't sleep on the Pelicans. There are teams that can just be ready for the moment. Even though you're ready for the moment, they're ready for the moment a little bit more. And all of a sudden that becomes you're a choker all of a sudden instead of you ran into some bad luck. And that happens,
Somebody will probably ask about Mike Conley. We'll get to that. We have somebody to ask a question right here. If anybody wants to just, I don't know if we need a line or anything, but you can just kind of come up and ask a question if you like, but we'll open it up. Sure. Oh, let me turn that up. Yep.
There we go. Yeah, so you guys were just getting into the ESPN talking heads picking against the Wolves in a potential playoff series due to either Rudy Gobert spacing issues that you don't buy into much or legacy of Steph Curry or LeBron James, these teams that could be lower seeds facing the Wolves in the first round. What I'm really interested is, where do you guys stand on that? I know, Dane, you were talking about if the Wolves are 7th in offense, I'll have a lot more faith in their ability to go deep. What do you expect the Wolves to be looking like going into the playoffs, and how much faith do you currently have in the Wolves going deep in the playoffs? Because at least from my perspective, I also don't buy into the Gobert defensive problems in the playoffs. The Cat stuff is still a little bit worrying. It seems like he does kind of press in those sort of environments, though. I think, Dane, you pointed this out in the podcast in the past. Denver's Cat was still their main focus. That's who they put Gordon on, not Ant. That could definitely be different this time around with Ant's star rising the way it is. And the playoffs always do seem to be this half-court environment, and I can think of very few teams in the NBA that thrive more in a slow, grinded-out half-court sort of game than the Minnesota Timberwolves' #1 defense. And I know Rudy has told you guys earlier in the season, you're like, hey, why aren't you running more of this Mike Conley, Rudy Gobert high pick and roll? It seems to be really effective. And Rudy's like, well, it's kind of boring for other people, and we know we've got it when we need it. Don't we expect to see a lot more of that in the playoffs? And I guess with those things in mind, as two people who watch the Timberwolves all the time, unlike the ESPN people, where are you on your faith in the team moving in?
Yeah, I think you mentioned Carl, and I think about it less so from the mental element of it, just because I don't know how to quantify that. We've seen that. There's a volatility to Carl's emotional state and how that impacts his play, and that might show up again. But I think about it more from the sense of I think that's what teams are going to go at, and it's not because they think Carl is mentally fragile. I think they're going to go at it because that's probably the best matchup to go at. And that makes sense to me. That's what I would do if I was coaching against him. You want, as much as the ESPN people talk about putting Rudy in space and forcing him to guard, like, you should do that with Carl. Or you should force him to chase. And I think that's why, they beat the Kings one time when Carl was out and, Nas was in at the 4 and he's just faster, chaser, And then the one time when Carl played, they did lose to the Kings. Like, I think there is an element of that, the degree to which an opponent can attack that one quote-unquote weakness within your strength. And then maybe from there, if Carl isn't able to, if he's getting scored on a lot, and that disrupts his overall rhythm to his game, maybe you do see more of that, him forcing it offensively or trying to get it all back in one spot. I think a lot of that does come back to Carl, but specifically because he's been asked to play a different position and guard in a different way, which we all know. And to be fair to him, he's acquitted himself pretty well within that. Less so against the certain matchups that are able to, puncture that. But broadly, Carl's done a good job. And Britt, I just like in that piece, you were like talking about Carl. You said he's a max salary star who doesn't pull rank with his teammates. And I think that is, Carl being pretty good defending at the 4 this season. That element of it, and Carl being, being a good soldier sounds like placating or patronizing or anything. He just has been. He really has been that. And that's probably been one of the biggest and most encouraging developments of the season to me. And I think when you apply that to a playoff series and a matchup or whatever, you have a goodwill accrued both with his teammates and the coaching staff that gives you a little bit more belief that he's going to do what he's asked to do, and they're going to know. They're going to have the scout against the Kings or the Pelicans or whoever it is, and they have a good coaching staff. They're going to know what to do. So can Carl execute on that, I think, is the ultimate question of how far this all goes, because he has a hard job. He has the hardest job. I do agree with Chris Finch in that. Obviously, he's been the one to ask to change the most, but yeah, it's a difficult role. Britt.
Well, this is why we work so well together.
You disagree?
No, just that you're an incredibly granular guy, and sometimes I have to be the granular guy. Sometimes I like to be the broad swath guy. And now I get to be the broad swath guy because you're getting into like matchups. We have no idea who they're going to play, what's going to happen.
But don't you think pretty much every team will try to attack all the 7 playoff teams? Like, is that not how you would go into that?
I think that's accurate until the first 2 games prove it isn't. I mean, I don't know.
I'm saying going into the series, though.
Believe me, I'm not arguing with your granular approach. All I'm saying is
Good.
That in this particular instance, what I would say, first of all, you have to acknowledge your biases. You mentioned the ESPN guys. They're riding the Stars because it's the safe bet. They do not get their ass uncovered if the Stars fail. They say, well, I thought Steph Curry, you bet on LeBron. Why wouldn't you bet on LeBron? He's a Hall of Famer. That's just lazy thinking. And so my bias is against it. It's not original thinking, and I want to go the other way. So there's momentum to go away from that, which is, fuck you, the Wolves will clean their clock. That doesn't mean it is accurate. It means that's my bias. The other side of the broad swath I want to enter is that the Timberwolves won 1 game in the first round last year. The idea that they will win an NBA championship or even make the conference finals after winning 1 game out of 4, that's not historically the way things happen. Teams don't arrive out of nowhere. Golden State, even in its like elevation to champion, I don't know the history quite frankly, but I think they either won a playoff series or at least won more than one game. It is a huge order to ask a team to go from not winning a playoff series since 2004 to being in the conference finals, let alone NBA finals. So what I would say is I think they're going to win a first-round series because I think that they have established enough sustenance on both sides of the ball, especially on defense, to be able to vanquish whatever team they have as an opponent. I think the second round is a coin flip, and it depends on how well they dispose of those people and then all the granular reasons he just brought in, which are, by the way, I didn't mean to demean it. It's just that that's a coach's approach. And right now I'm taking a guy in the nosebleed section approach to this game, which is essentially this team has a puncher's chance of getting into the NBA Finals, but a puncher's chance usually means they need to get lucky and land it, and they probably won't land it. So, are they good enough to win a first-round series? Absolutely. Can those 4 to 7 games played by Jaden McDaniels, who has never been in the playoffs except for that time in Memphis for a while where he played very well, but was a very different part of that team. Naz Reid and Ant, all of that will be a good thing. And all of that will be foundational. Mike Conley's back for 2 more years. Rudy Gobert is back for 2 more years. Cat has 4 years left. Everybody wants to talk about the salary cap, and it is horrendous. But the benefits of having a horrendous salary cap is you have a deep roster that is very talented. And if they get good playoff experience and not a gentleman's sweep at the hands of the Nuggets last year, if they play really good basketball in the postseason and learn lessons and win 50-plus games, I'll take it.
Thank you for the question. Clap it up. I like how everyone's actually sitting in the chair. This is cool.
So you were talking about the horrendous cap situation. So I kind of have a two-parter that kind of deals with that. So Kyle Anderson has looked a lot better as of late. Couple of games going into the All-Star break, he started to look a little bit more like himself from last year. How much of that sort of resurgence that we have kind of seen do you guys buy? And as a follow-up to that, how do you think that affects the way that the Wolves and the league at large values him in terms of what kind of a contract he might get next year?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. What stood out to me in Portland last week was Finch referenced multiple times the trade deadline passing in relation to Kyle Anderson. And obviously the implication there is that was messing with Kyle's head, right? Is he a part of this? And then kind of understanding if he isn't a part of it, that it's his fault. You know, that's hard. Like it's his fault because he hasn't been doing this season what he did a season ago. And it made me kind of reflect on the whole Kyle experience of this year, and he doesn't seem like the type of person who would press. But I do think he has been pressing, after, you just come into the season, you don't have confidence in the three-point shot. But you're like, and I'm Kyle Anderson. I'm going to fidget my way to the basket and figure it out. And that wasn't working. And then so you kind of get in this stuck place where you're like, all right, I need to start shooting threes. Okay, I can't. I'm not making them, even in practice. And I think he just sort of hit. Then the trade deadline comes, and he just hit all of these walls. And I think what's really big for him is the trade deadline has passed, and Finch's confidence in him has not wavered. I don't think it's wavered at any point. We've asked numerous times about Anderson, and like one time you did, and he basically said, "F you." Like no more Kyle Anderson conversation. We're going to play him. We believe in it. He's not a shooter. We're going to do it. And so I think like a bold prediction for the rest of the season is that Kyle Anderson looks a lot more like last year's version of himself. And I know so many people are frustrated and they remember the things that Kyle doesn't do well right, they glare. And they glare in the numbers too. But we forget about the defense, and the value of that. And to my point on the Karl Anthony Towns element of being attacked, like the Wolves always have a defensive pivot off of Karl into Kyle Anderson. Now you're not gonna want to cut Cat's minutes down to 20 or something like that, but I think we sleep on the value of being able to plug Kyle Anderson in at the 4 and do everything defensively that Cat sometimes can't do. And yeah, I kind of think he is a pivot point for the rest of this season, and how that plays out in the final 27 games and whatever happens in the playoffs determines, one, what his market value is. Because, I think his market value around the league is depressed in terms of what teams would sign him for this offseason. But it also, if he does have a really strong run to close the season, he becomes more of a necessity. You feel, if you're Tim Connelly and Chris Finch, more of a necessity to bring back. And then you can start having that conversation of like, all right, we'll give you $7-8 million, even though that comes with an extra $22 million or whatever in luxury tax. If Kyle Anderson doesn't look a lot better, I would understand passing on that for next season, right? And again, that it comes down to the weird part. We're not talking about cap space or anything like that. We're talking about the owner's money, and that's always a weird thing. But I would understand it if Kyle Anderson is continues to be who he was for the rest of the season. I wouldn't be surprised if he's not back, logically, just given the money. And then at the same time, I think he'd probably go to a contender and be pretty good on that team next season. Did you already answer?
No. I first of all, there's the locker room element. Rudy Gobert punching him was not a mistake. I mean, Kyle Anderson will tell you when you're fucking up, and that's value. That's a valuable trait.
Not a ton of those on the team.
Right. There is also his defense, which, with the possible exception of Rudy Gobert and including Jaden McDaniels in the conversation, I would say that Slow-Mo has been the best on-ball defender on this team thus far this season. He
Better
has
than Nikhil?
Yes. Simply because he goes 2 through 4.
Yeah, I was going to say.
And I think that Nikhil, most of the time, if I'm 2 small 3, I prefer Nikhil. But having that 2 through 4 really makes him the best. I mean, I think the best matchup for Zion is Kyle Anderson. And I think the best matchup for a lot of players is Kyle Anderson.
I know you guys have mentioned that he's a really good matchup against like Luka Doncic as well.
Exactly. Nice. I mean, he's got a phenomenal wingspan, and he stays down on up fakes. It sounds like a simple thing. It's not. Up fakes, if somebody is really, really good at shooting and they look like they're going up and they're going to put one in your face, you have this incredible desire to contest that shot. So staying down on up
I
fakes,
can't even jump that high, so I'm not going
but staying down on up fakes is incredibly important. So bottom line, great in the locker room, superb defender. If we're looking at sustainable skills, even before this eye surgery thing, which he doesn't want to talk about, which means that it's a factor. If it wasn't a factor, he'd say it has nothing to do with my eyes. But it does, because he doesn't want to talk about it. He has been up and down in his career from distance. You know, he's had terrible seasons from long range. He shot over 40% last year. It was a huge boon. and it really helped the other aspects of his game. Now everybody sees it. You swing, swing, swing. Kyle Anderson's wide open. He takes a hit, one of his usual slow-mo dribbles very slowly into the paint, and you've got to deal with the fact that what he's trying to figure out with his enormous galaxy brain is how to draw the foul or bring people to him to dish and assist. And consequently, his foul shots are way up, his assists are up, and his turnovers are up, and his shooting is down. That's not sustainable in the playoffs. That's exactly the kind of thing we were just talking about, which is that you pick at a scab.
They're not going to guard him at all.
It's there. They're not going to guard him at all.
It is.
They are going to make Kyle Anderson beat you with open shots, and I'm not totally convinced that can happen. So it's the classic thing of what you give up, what you don't give up. If a opponent, to Dane's point, which is a very good one, by the way, if Cat is getting wiped out by his matchup, slow-mo can patch that damn quick.
Even just for it is important for Carl to. Sometimes it helps when you just take him out 3 minutes earlier than he normally would.
Right.
I've seen that so many times. Just
it's fatigue,
he's
right?
Anxious. Yeah,
fatigue and mental fatigue, right?
Yeah,
Physical and mental.
calm it down, get back into the game. That you have a Kyle Anderson to be able to do that.
But to
I think
Dane's
it's huge.
point, also, I will be shocked if Kyle Anderson is back next year. And if he is, it's because Chris Finch is laid down in front of the railroad tracks. It's the only way it happens. Because logic says no. Logic says you cannot add tens of millions of dollars for your eighth man who is a deficiency in crucial aspects of the game, despite all the great things he does in other aspects of the game. So for slow-mo fans, and I count myself as an ardent one, I'm enjoying these games. And I think he will, to Dane's point again, go, whoever signs him will get a bargain and a great player. And
Much like the Wolves did last year.
right.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Appreciate it. All right. Yeah. I like how we're doing the clapping. This is cool. All right. Other question.
All right, so there was a lot of talk around the All-Star break about who will be the next face of the league. They asked LeBron this question, a lot of the talking heads, and LeBron and it seems like everyone else had Ant near the top of that list or at the top of that list because of the charisma and obviously the stardom that we already see. And I just wanted to kind of get your guys' thoughts on that and just kind of where he needs to get to maybe, become the face of the league, the next face of the league, and also just kind of his potential to maybe just impact culture here, but also nationally. It's just kind of crazy to think about. But, you go to LA and you see all these Kobe murals, and obviously, you see the legacy that MJ has, and just kind of just put that into perspective and maybe just kind of where, his journey up to this point and maybe the potential that he has.
Yeah, I think for me, my first reaction to that is I'm grateful that that's a possibility and find myself fortunate to be able to cover that. It's a cool thing because it is bigger than basketball, right? And I think if he does take that path or just whatever path he takes, it's already interesting to think about him. Finch was hired 3 years ago today. To think about who Ant was 3 years ago today to what I perceive him to be now is already we could run through a million different things, and they're not all basketball things, which is selfishly cool. And I think for all of us here, it's really cool that he plays for this local team and we get front row seats to see what that is. I don't really have my head wrapped around what all goes into that, to finding that ascension. I obviously MJ is just way too high of a bar for anyone, or Kobe, asking for that type of impact. And the reality of the situation is that type of impact just doesn't come without the winning. Really, really winning, and probably starting now, And to Britt's point, or everyone knows this from the past 2 seasons, he's elevated to the moment. And we should have a confidence in his ability to elevate to the moment in the playoffs. And that's what faces of the league or franchises do. I think he's got a lot that he needs to get better at before that. But he is 22. And when we're talking about this, it's like an implication that he will be, could be the face of the league or that like now. And I don't think that's like you didn't put that on Kobe at 22. When Kobe was 22, they did win the championship. And that was kind of like his coming out party, but he was number 2 on that team, clearly, right? And I mean, was MJ a rookie when he was 22, right? Like, I always have to remind myself about that with Ant, that we are a long ways away from whatever it is or is not that he is going to become. And my whole thought is I can't wrap my head around it. I'm just going to enjoy it while he's here, because that's no guarantee, man. I think we sleep a lot on the fact that he signed a 5-year contract, no player options last season. That was not going to be the case. Like he changed agencies. His previous agency did not want him to be here long term, or was not confident in the idea that it is a major win that Anthony Edwards is going to take that first step of being a face of the franchise in Minnesota, because he is under contract for at least the next 5 seasons after this one. I don't know. I mean, you saw that, Britt, happen with KG. I don't really know how to think about it or know how much to care about it, I guess.
I think I'll use my age card on this, not so much on KG, but as in my grumpy old man mode, which is
Wilt Chamberlain?
No. Essentially, first of all, I think you cover the waterfront on the answer, the right answer in terms of he's done so much, he's done this. There's a lot of things to cherish him for, and I believe in that. What I love about Ant is that, people talk about team chemistry. He's an alchemist. He basically turns things that aren't supposed to be golden into gold. Because he calls out his teammates as better than they are. He wants to deflect things. And he does it with such a plain-spoken naivete and childlike innocence to what he does that what I wrote in the piece I wrote a couple of weeks ago is that Ant is chronologically age 22, but he is also the best attributes of people age 5 and age 39, which is 17 years either side of 22. And that's what I like about Ant, is he has a maturity in some ways and a childlike innocence in some ways, and he's 22 in some ways, and all that is wonderful. Where the grumpy old man in me comes in is the idea that there is a face of the franchise. Face of the NBA. Face of the franchise would actually be more realistic. But a face of the NBA will have everything to do with how good Ant is coached, how good his teammates are, and how many rings he stacks. Because if he doesn't, if there are no rings, there will be no face of the NBA. So it's kind of beyond Ant's control. Again, it's one of those things that if cable television was cut in 2/3 by the time of things I had to deal with, this question wouldn't even be raised, because it's a theoretical question that has no right or wrong answer, which means that everybody can have an opinion, and regardless of how smart or dumb it is, it will be listened to and thought about, which is all they crave. So, who cares if Ant is the face of the NBA or not? Can Ant bring a ring to the Minnesota Timberwolves? That's the question I want answered. Can Ant be a player that grows in his scope in terms of his Q quotient or anything else, at the same time retaining that 5-year-old crystallization that makes him a special human being and makes him beloved by his teammates while he's growing as a player who is getting more consistent on defense and better on offense and shedding some of this ref baiting stuff and still finishing at the rim. These are the types of things that I want to know about Ant in the future. Because if those questions are answered in the right way, then people will debate, the same talking heads who are lazily throwing this out in the first place, will debate whether it is in fact Ant or some other 22-year-old guy 6 years from now, while Ant is 28, who is the real face of the franchise, or the NBA. So, I lose patience with
and
theoretical
Mike, too.
arguments.
I think there's an element of what will get Ant there is the proper surroundings, is what you're saying. And, like, the veteran leader thing, baton has kind of been passed around from his rookie year was Ricky Rubio, Pat Bev the second year, and in these last 2 years, it's been Mike Conley. And to the extent that I know Ant, I think that's a really valuable thing to him, and I think there's a value in it being the same guy, right? And after I, rattled through like spreadsheets and stuff thinking about the Mike Conley signing, I thought about that. And the fact that Mike Conley will be there to like usher in Ant from like NBA puberty into adulthood, I think that's an important thing in achieving this ambiguous label that whatever it is or isn't. So,
Although I hadn't thought of it that way, Pat Bev and Mike Conley is a really cool 1-2 combo for mentorship.
and Ricky,
Yeah, and Ricky, right?
yeah, all in their own pretty
He's living right.
ways. Yeah, right. All right, well, thank you for the question. Take another one. Yeah, don't forget the clapping.
All right. First off, I want
Hang on for a second. Has anybody else needs a first question?
Dude,
Were you the guy first?
no, we just talked to him before the show.
Come on, Britt. I'm just kidding. I wanted to thank you guys and shout out you guys for doing a forum like this. I think this is a valued asset
Now you're going to
to
praise me on top of all this.
fan base. Yeah, like I just think there's not a lot of things that do. I'm talking loud too. That do something like this. So it's really cool you guys are willing to do this, and I know a lot of us really value that. So, yeah. Second, no.
Clapping guys back.
Shouts out Church Bro League. Team Old Bro stinks, obviously. And then my question is, last year we had someone kind of blossom or come out for around the playoff time and into the playoff time. And I think this is a cool time frame to talk about that. But like, who would beat last year was Nickeil Alexander-Walker. He really started shooting well. He started really playing as a part of the team. I think he was the guy that kind of surprised people in the playoffs last year. Who, in your opinion, going into what we know right now, is your best bet on who that will be for the Timberwolves in this playoff season?
You want to take that first?
Sure. Only because he runs hot and cold, and when he's hot, he's scalding. I would say Naz Reid. Yeah. If the planets align, and Naz has no control over this, none of us have any control over this. There are times when players find their game. But I will tell you, if Naz finds his game at the same time that the playoffs are going on, we've all seen Naz on a heater. We've all seen Naz getting the ball on the run. Jim Pete has begun to pick up on it. Naz, not even off the dribble, off the sprint, where he occasionally puts the ball on the floor at just the right time, long enough to get from the arc to the basket, is a joy. Naz with his shrug threes is, another joy. Naz in the middle of a transition break, which is actually an underrated quality of Naz, is he fosters the break as much as he starts or finishes it. All of those things. I still think his defense, if he's used in the right way, he's actually, I think, in some ways become a better mid-range to perimeter defender than he has been a post defender.
That's just a fact.
And so that's a unique quality that if somebody I was talking to before the thing, we talked about the mid-range and how mid-range teams kill the Wolves. Well, Nas is one of the better mid-range defenders on guys who, like an Ingram or, even an Embiid to some extent. But the point being that if Nas has done a good job defending the mid-range and is in his bag, he's going to become a meme in a big, big way come playoff time.
And I think, too, Nas is going to play more in the playoffs. Like, I don't.
When they shorten the bench.
Yeah, I think they're going to shorten the rotation at some point. I've always been a big believer with Nas that he needs extended time to catch a rhythm. And I remember doing it at the beginning of the season. The Nas numbers, when he was at the 4 next to Cat or Rudy, were always terrible. And being as someone who is interested and wanted to have that happen, I was always finding excuses for why that didn't work. And I think a big part of it is it was always like, all right, Nas would get like 2 minutes here next to Rudy, 2 minutes there next to Cat. What's happened this season is he plays his extended 9, 10, 11-minute stretch almost all at the 4, next to another center. And in that, catches a rhythm, and the numbers. I mean, last year, Nas and Rudy were minus 12.1 net rating, was like one of the worst on the team of any two-man pairing that played, X amount of minutes. The best two-man pairing thus far in terms of net rating this season is Nas and Rudy, and it's like plus 17 something.
Right.
And I really believe, some of that obviously is him acclimating to playing the 4 and understanding it better and all that. I think a ton of it is to letting him catch a rhythm and get used to it and go longer. It's part of the reason why down the road, I don't think he's one of the players who flattens off at this level that he's at. So if he becomes a starter at some point in his career, I do think he gets better. And again, just related to rhythm there. So when the playoffs come, I think Nas is going to play more. They're not going to bench him. They're not going to do any of that sort of stuff. They're going to let him go, and I think he's going to be successful. The two names I thought of were Nas and then also Jaden McDaniels. Jaden hasn't had a bad year. Jaden McDaniels hasn't had, oh my God, we just signed this dude to a $100+ million contract year, right? And it stood out to me at practice today what Finch said about him is a point of emphasis for the rest of the season is getting Jaden to be more consistent. He was like, we'd have a good one of those high-impact Jaden games at the beginning of the year, maybe 1 in every 3 games. He goes, it's turned up to 2 in every 3 games. Jaden's having that type of good game. He goes, and now the goal is to get it closer to every night. And
I think he was being charitable, by the way.
Yeah, I do too.
I think the goal is to get him up to 2 out of 3,
sure.
Which is still very good.
But the idea that I like the idea that it has been turning up, and I think it can turn further, right?
Right.
And to what the first name that came to my mind when you said the Nikhil thing, where it's all of a sudden it's twice as good. Yeah. I'm not sure Nas can be twice as good as he's been. I think Jaden could be these last 25 games of this season be whoa. And again, maybe that filters into he's doing that. Now they're a top 5 offense, right? He's kind of an external link offensively to Cat or Ant there. I think that's who I would choose is Jaden as the most likely one to be wow, that was a lot better post All-Star break than it was pre All-Star break. Thank you for the question.
And against certain matchups, I would say that you got to have Ant and Nas on the floor at the same time.
For sure.
That
Iowa
plus,
Ants,
that
baby.
plus minus is huge.
That's true.
And if you have a Dallas, for example, or some team that can handle either one of them really one-on-one.
That's how they pummel teams, right?
Those are the kinds of playoff things on which series turn. If Ant and Nas are on the floor for 20 minutes and they're outscoring the team by 12 points, which I regard as almost a given, quite frankly, against a team like Dallas.
Right.
Again, that's Cat's ego you're dealing with there.
Right.
But Anyway,
We'll take 2 more questions here, and then we'll wrap it up. Do you want to do the last one and kind of pump it? Yep.
I'll keep this one quick. For a postseason success, how important is it that Ant develops a shot that's reliable for late in the game situations when the whistle gets tighter?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think we've talked about this a little bit before on the pod. Like, the player, whatever, I don't know. If we were ranking MVP candidates, there would be like 15 players who are ahead of Ant, right, this season. And I think if you looked at every one of those players, if we went through them all, we could be like, this is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's spot. This is what Kawhi Leonard does here. This is what Nikola Jokic does here. There's not yet a repetition to what Ant's spots are, right? And I think whether it's this season or the next 3, like we were talking about before, there's going to be a consistency to an action or a move, probably from the mid-range, which is just like butter. Every time you can get to it and do it. That's why, I mean, that started with Shai last year, I think, and all of a sudden it's like we can go to that whenever we want, and we can get a good, that possession can end well. Right. And Ant can do stupendous things, but he can't really do anything consistently yet. And I think that's if and when that ever happens, that's when we start flipping the switch into like, okay, superstar, okay, MVP. Like that is the thing. And I don't know if that happens this season, but I think it's it might, playoff wise, it might be the biggest key to something that can pull you out of the times in which are going to certainly happen in the playoffs, particularly on offense, where this team just gets stagnant and sticky, as we've seen a bunch of times this year. Can Ant be the answer to that? And it was Portland, but I feel like he did that, was doing that right before the break. And if he can do that, to me, that's a whole nother level of like, you break it down, man, every team that doesn't have a star player sucks in the last 5 seconds of the shot clock. The teams that are great at it are the teams that have players who can be efficient when there's not a lot of time to be efficient. I think Ant's moved that a little bit. There's still, when we talk about like room to grow, I think Ant has a lot there.
I would argue that there's 2 options for that. I would argue that the one he chooses that as a third option is not the best, which is his back to the basket, do-si-do turnaround banker from the right slot.
Yeah, all of the things he thinks are his spots are not
that's
good.
basically a bad shot. But I will tell you that I would regard 2 of his shots in his arsenal as money, especially in the playoffs when he's laser focused and generally tends to elevate his game. And one is the walk-up 3, and the other one is the left-hander off the glass through traffic. I think both of those, even in the playoffs, he's going to get the whistle or finish well on a drive with his left hand off the glass. And I think the walk-up 3 is going to be something that teams will learn to fear in the postseason.
And I feel like both of those things open up the step back 3. They get it. They get him the rhythm to have the confidence to just go and take that and do it consistently. And that's when Ant breaks you. Those are the 16-point quarters, you know. He has that ability, obviously. We've seen it plenty of times. But I'm not sure he, like, internally knows with a timeliness when to push all of those buttons. But, again, if we would watch the Toronto game, game 1 of the season, compared to the last 5 games, it's already grown. And there's already more and more of that. So, yeah, let's see 27 more games in a playoff series of what that all, you know, what all materializes there. I'm really interested to see Ant in the playoffs, how much he can do, and if they don't ultimately win the championship, how he reacts to that. Like, I think there is a chance that, and maybe it's even is the conference finals. So this is in the conference finals, and everybody would be like, that's awesome. Ant will not think that's awesome. And could inspire change. I think that next level for Ant probably comes after losing in the playoffs. And if that happens and that all comes together, like, yeah, I mean, I don't know. That's that then is a top 5 player in the league for sure. Thank you for the question. Do you have a question, or do you? This is Dan Herman, the owner of Falling Knife Brewing Company. Let's hear it for Dan.
I was just going to say, in terms of the guy that was falsely accused of asking 2 questions, we wouldn't do forums like this if you didn't show up. So we really appreciate you coming out here and giving us the opportunity to have these conversations, have moments like this, coming out for game days. I mean, you know, he's talked about this a little bit, but being here on a Saturday away game, I mean, it's chaotic in here and so fun to be a part of it. And we definitely never cross 149 people, which is our fire capacity. But my 2 questions, one is very serious, and we're trying to get you on record for this. Of the remaining 27 games, what do you think they come out with?
17 games at home, right?
Yeah,
10
and 10 on the road. And
10 on the road.
actually, Tom, your colleague, asked us both about this independently. We both had the same answer,
17 and 10.
which is 56 wins.
I didn't think very hard about it, but
Well, you shouldn't think very hard about it because it's a random question with deserves a random answer.
Sure.
no, I mean, let's think about it. You had all the details of it, so we know. So there's 7 back-to-backs, the majority of which I think are at home. That's not the way to think of it. You hate the
I mean-
back-to-backs.
How many games will they win against Charlotte? How many wins will they win against Boston? It happens to be the same. You know, I mean, they beat the Clippers twice. Did you and I think that was going to happen? I mean, the beauty of basketball is you don't know what's going to happen. If you win 60% of your games, it's really good. If you win 40% of your games, you think you have some hope. That isn't that much of a difference. And the way things go, the playoffs are a little bit more reliable, but we don't know who's going to be hurt. We don't know who's, on the road a back-to-back. It may be that if you are on a back-to-back, but the team you're playing that night is without their 2 best players, it's a lot better matchup than the front of that back-to-back where the team is hot and coming in rested. Nobody knows what that is right now. I mean, it is fun to speculate about it. I feel like I've spent most of this podcast being an old man grouch about things that are, what if this happens? Well, I mean, yeah, there's 75 factors that go into that. I don't know 74 of them. So on the basis of the one I do know, I'll say 17 and 10.
I do just want to say that end of the episode for those of the people who are listening at home. And again, thank you all for coming out here. Doing what I'm doing independently not only requires those of you who listen all the time, that allows me to do this as a job. So I'm thankful for that. And because so many of you listen, businesses like Falling Knife are willing to partner with us, and that makes this possible. It really does. And to the extent that you guys come out to these, and I mean, unfortunately, we're at the games in the playoffs, but so I can't be here. But it looked so cool and fun to be here for the playoffs. They had a TV truck out there, like one with a big. I don't know, how would you describe it, Dan?
It's a big fucking TV.
Yeah, big, yeah. And as somebody who's from here, and Dan would send me pictures or videos from those playoff games, or just it's not just Saturday nights. I mean, there's people here any road or any game watching it, and I got into this because I wanted to work in basketball, but I'm also from here, and one of the coolest things to me, Britt, about this season is the people from here having something that's actually worth watching and worth listening to. Like, I appreciate all of you, like, listening to podcast episodes where you spent like 27 minutes talking about Jordan McLaughlin's future or something like that. But that we have the playoffs and this to talk about. I'm really glad that you are all getting that experience, and it makes this all possible. So thank you very much. Thank you to Falling Knife Brewing Company. Thank you for all of you who came out tonight. We're gonna stay here and hang out a little bit. If you have any other, you want to sit down at our special little chair and ask us a question, come on up. We're normal.
Dane,
Britt bites,
Dane,
I don't.
I have an irreverent one.
But yes, go Dan.
Of the 3 players that are expecting children, who is the most likely to name their kid Britt?
What's the name?
Britt?
Probably Rudy. Yeah, probably. No, that might be Carl if that time ever comes. But.
Hey, I just want to say to finish it off, I make it a point in my life not to get paid to say what I think. And these guys aren't paying me to say this, but I think that the folks at Falling Knife have been nothing but great to us. They have great beer. They have a good spot here. I enjoy talking basketball with them. They're real fans. Hats off to them.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. And thank you to all you guys who came out again. We'll be hanging out 27-0 NBA Finals. Let's do it. Let's go. He's Britt. I'm Dane. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Grinning hard so you can find me in the crowd, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.